Begin. The wind, smelling of dust and distant sage, whispered secrets through the cracked planks of the old barn. Inside, Sergeant Silas, his hair like spun moonlight and his eyes crinkling at the corners with a lifetime of stories, sat on an overturned barrel. He wasn't the kind of sergeant who barked orders anymore. His voice was soft, like the rustle of prairie grass. He'd seen too much of the hard world during his soldiering days, seen too many good folks suffer. Now, in his quiet retirement, living in a small shack not far from this sturdy, forgotten barn, he wanted to do something different. He wanted to build something good, something strong, right here on the vast, stretching plains. This abandoned barn, with its high hayloft and wide, welcoming doors, had become his new post. It wasn't a place for battles, but for quiet lessons. The very air in it seemed to hold the echoes of hoarse breath and the scent of dried hay, a comforting, honest smell. Silas believed that the best way to help his new community, scattered like hardy wildflowers across the endless flatland, was to arm its youngest members not with guns, but with knowledge. He saw the future in the bright, curious eyes of the girls who came to him. They were tough, these prairie children, used to hard work and long days under the sun, but many of them hadn't had the chance to learn what he considered truly important things. He wasn't just teaching them to read words on a page, though that was a big part of it. He was teaching them to read the world around them. He'd gather them in the barn, the only light often coming from a single, flickering lantern that cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. He knew that out here, where towns were few and far between, and the night sky was a vast, inky blanket stitched with a million shining pinpricks, knowing how to read a map of stars was just as important as reading a book. He was an old man, but his spirit was young, full of a fierce, quiet hope for the future of these plains and the brave souls who called them home. And begin. The lantern, hung from a sturdy beam in the barn, cast a warm, buttery glow over the eager faces of the girls. 3 of them, Alara, Lyra, and young Willow, sat on rough-hewn benches, their eyes wide with wonder as Silas opened a worn book. The air was thick with the sweet, comforting smell of dried hay, a scent that always reminded Silas of home and simpler times. Outside, the soft snuffles and deep, steady breathing of horses in their stalls added a gentle rhythm to the quiet lessons. Today, Silas began, his voice a low rumble. We learn about words that become pictures in your mind. He pointed to a drawing of a galloping horse in the book, then traced the letters beneath it with a calloused finger. Alara, the oldest, sounded out the letters slowly, her brow furrowed in concentration. HORSC, she whispered, a smile blooming on her face as the word clicked into place. Willow, not yet able to read, copied the shape of the letters with her finger in the dust on the floor, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Later, when dusk painted the prairie sky in shades of orange and purple, Silas led them outside. The vast dome of the night sky, unmarred by city lights, sparkled with countless stars. Look up, girls, he instructed, his arms sweeping across the heavens. That bright one there, that's the North Star. It never moves. It's like a compass in the sky. Lyra, quick and curious, already knew many of the constellations. She pointed to the Big Dipper, then explained how its 2 end stars pointed right to the North Star. Silas showed them how to use their hands to measure distances between stars, how to find true north even on the darkest night. He told them stories of sailors and explorers who used the stars to find their way across great oceans and empty lands. He wanted them to feel the power of knowing, the freedom that came with being able to navigate not just a book but the wide, wild world. The cool night air carried the faint scent of damp earth and the distant howl of a coyote, making the lessons feel even more real, more vital. And begin. The lessons continued, day after day, week after week. The girls' fingers, once clean, were now often smudged with ink from the simple pens and homemade ink Silas provided. They'd bend over rough paper, their tongues poking out in concentration, copying letters and words. But their favorite task was drawing maps. Not just maps of the land, but intricate, swirling maps of the night sky. They used charcoal and ink to mark out the constellations Silas taught them, connecting the dots of stars with careful, shaky lines. Alara was especially good at drawing the Big Dipper, while Lyra, with her sharp eyes, could sketch the fainter stars of the Little Dipper and the winding path of the Milky Way. Willow, though still too young for complex charts, loved to press her ink-stained thumbprints onto the paper, pretending they were new, tiny stars in their growing universe. Silas also taught them about the rhythm of the plains itself. He'd take them out on walks, teaching them to listen to the sounds of the land. One crucial lesson involved horses. "Listen," he'd say as a horse trotted by. "That's a steady pace. 1, 2, 1, 2. You can measure distance by how many hoofbeats you hear in a minute. It's like a clock in their feet." He'd explain how a horse walking had a different beat than one trotting or galloping. They practiced counting, tapping their feet to the imaginary rhythm, learning to judge how far away a rider was just by the sound of their approach. These were not just fun games. Silas made sure they understood the practical side. If you know how fast a horse moves, and you can count its steps, you can figure out how long it'll take to get somewhere, or how far someone has traveled. He'd explain, his voice serious. He wanted them to be resourceful, capable, and aware of their surroundings. Their star charts grew more detailed, filling with the names of prairie constellations like the wagon wheel and the buffalo herd that Silas had made up for them, linking the sky to their everyday lives. Their minds were becoming sharp, their senses keen, and their understanding of the world around them deepened with every ink-stained finger and every hoofbeat rhythm they learned. And begin. Life on the plains, though often hard, usually followed a peaceful rhythm. But one harsh morning, that peace was shattered. Alara, Lyra, and Willow were on their way to Silas's barn, their satchels bouncing against their sides. When they heard it, shouts, the frantic whinny of horses, and the unmistakable, cruel crack of whips. Their hearts pounded like drum beats against their ribs. They ducked behind a stand of cottonwoods, peering through the leaves. What they saw made their blood run cold. A group of rough, mean-looking men, their faces hidden by dust and grim expressions, were rounding up people from the nearby homesteads. These were not ordinary travelers or traders. These were slavers, wicked men who took people away from their homes and families to sell them. The girls watched in horror as their neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Gable, and their young son, Thomas, were roughly pulled from their cabin. Thomas cried out for his mother, but his voice was quickly silenced. The slavers tied their hands and pushed them onto horses, their faces pale with fear. The girls recognized the Gables. Mrs. Gable had always shared her fresh-baked bread, and Mr. Gable had once helped Silas fix a fence. Thomas was just a little older than Willow. A chill ran through them, colder than any winter wind. The slavers moved with grim purpose, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they herded their captives away, heading east towards the distant hills. The girls held their breath, terrified of being seen, terrified of what was happening. When the last hoofbeats faded into the prairie silence, a silence that now felt heavy and wrong, the girls scrambled out from their hiding place. Their faces were streaked with tears and dirt, their small hands clenched into fists. Fear was a cold knot in their stomachs, but beneath it, a spark of something else began to glow, a fierce, quiet anger. They ran, as fast as their legs could carry them, toward Silas's barn, needing to tell him what they had seen, needing to find help. The community, usually so resilient, was now gripped by a chilling fear. Everyone knew what slavers meant, and everyone felt helpless. And begin. Silas listened with a heavy heart as the girls, breathless and tearful, recounted the horrifying events. His kind eyes hardened with a familiar, old soldier's glint. He knew despair could spread like a wildfire, but so could hope. "We can't just sit here," he said, his voice low and firm. "We need to act." He went straight to the Gables' ransacked homestead. The slavers had been careless, leaving a trail of destruction, but also something else. Tucked under a broken floorboard, Silas found a crumpled piece of paper. It looked like a rough map, hastily drawn, with strange symbols and lines. He brought it back to the barn, laying it out on the dusty floor beneath the warm glow of the lantern. Alara, Lyra, and even little Willow huddled around it, their earlier fear now mixed with a surge of purpose. Silas pointed to a squiggly line. "What do you make of this, Alara?" he asked, testing her reading skills. She squinted, tracing the line with an ink-stained finger. "It looks like a river," she mumbled. "And these marks. They're words, but they're messy." Lyra, with her sharp eyes for patterns, noticed something else. "Look, Sergeant Silas. These dots, they're not just dots. They're like the stars on our charts." She pointed to a cluster of dots arranged in a familiar pattern. "That's the Big Dipper, almost upside down. And that one, it's the North Star." Silas nodded, a proud smile touching his lips. "Exactly, Lyra. These men are using the stars to guide them, just like we do. But they're not as careful. They've drawn some of our prairie constellations right here on their map." Together, they worked. Alara read the few rough words, which spoke of crossing the divide and reaching the market by full moon. Lyra used her star knowledge, carefully comparing the dots on the slaver's map to their own detailed star charts, figuring out the direction and the probable path. Willow, though she didn't fully understand the map, watched with intense focus, sensing the importance of their task. The ink-stained fingers that once traced letters now deciphered a path to freedom. End. Begin. With the slaver's path now clear, a determined quiet settled over Silas and the girls. They couldn't wait for others. Time was against them, and the Gables needed them. Silas looked at the girls, his gaze firm but kind. "This won't be easy," he said, "but we have knowledge, and that's a powerful weapon." Alara, usually shy, spoke first. "We know the stars, Sergeant. We can find them, even at night." Lyra nodded, her eyes bright with a fierce resolve. "And we know how to be quiet. We can sneak." Little Willow, though she didn't fully grasp the danger, mimicked her older sisters, her small face serious. Silas listened, a plan already forming in his mind, built on the very lessons he had painstakingly taught them. "Exactly," he affirmed. "The night is our friend. We move when they sleep. Stealth will be our shield, and the stars our guide." He knew a direct confrontation was foolish. They were few, and the slavers were many and likely armed. Their strength lay in what the slavers didn't expect: smarts and silence. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Silas cleaned and loaded his old rifle, a last resort, but primarily he focused on quiet tools. They gathered soft cloth to muffle their footsteps and dark blankets to blend into the night. Silas showed them how to tie knots silently, how to move without rustling a leaf. He packed a small bag with water, some dried meat, and a simple first aid kit. Their plan was simple yet brave. Ride under the cover of darkness, guided by the stars, to the slavers' camp. Once there, they would use their quiet movements to get close, then their wits to free the captives. The rhythm of hoofbeats would be their clock, helping them judge their travel time. Alara would keep track of the written clues from the map, while Lyra would be their primary navigator, her eyes glued to the prairie constellations. Willow, though small, would be their extra set of ears, her keen senses often picking up things the older ones missed. The barn, usually a place of gentle learning, now buzzed with the quiet, urgent energy of a mission. Every lesson, every ink-stained finger, every star chart, every hoofbeat rhythm was now ready to be put to the ultimate test. End. Begin. As twilight deepened into a moonless night, Silas and the three girls slipped out of the barn. The vast prairie stretched before them, a dark, silent ocean under an immense sky. The only light came from the countless stars that now shone with a fierce, guiding brilliance. Their horses, carefully chosen for their quiet hooves and steady gaits, seemed to understand the gravity of their mission, moving with an almost silent grace. "North Star, Lyra," Silas whispered, his voice barely audible above the gentle creak of leather. Lyra, perched on her pony, didn't even need to look for long. Her eyes, trained by weeks of practice, found the steady beacon instantly. "Follow its path," she directed Alara, who rode just ahead, clutching the slaver's map, now laminated with beeswax to protect it from the dew. Alara squinted at the crude drawings, matching the vague landmarks to the contours of the night-shrouded plains. They rode like ghosts across the prairie. The only sounds were the soft thud of hooves on earth and the faint whisper of the wind through the tall grass. Every now and then, Silas would stop, listening intently for any distant sound, while the girls used their hoofbeat rhythm lessons. They counted the steps, calculating how far they had traveled, checking it against the map scale. Willow, bundled up behind Alara, was surprisingly quiet, her small hand clutching a piece of the gable's lost ribbon, her ears perked for anything unusual. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp soil and wild herbs. The constellations, those familiar friends from their barn lessons, were now their compass. Lyra would periodically reorient them, her small finger tracing invisible lines from star to star. When they had to cross a shallow creek, they dismounted, leading their horses carefully, making sure not to splash. Their movements were careful and precise, just as Silas had taught them, like little shadows blending perfectly with the dark landscape. The prairie, once a place of everyday lessons, had transformed into a living map, and they, its tiny, determined explorers, were navigating it with the confidence born of knowledge and a brave heart. Begin. Hours later, as the first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Lyra whispered, "There, Sergeant Silas," just as the map showed. In the distance, a faint glow marked the slavers' camp, nestled beside a small creek. They dismounted, tethering their horses in a thicket of brush, far enough away to be hidden, but close enough for a quick getaway. Silas took out his old field glasses and peered through the dim light. He saw the gables, tied near a dying campfire, guarded by two men who seemed to be dozing. The other slavers were likely asleep in their bedrolls. This was their chance. "Remember your lessons, girls," he murmured. Quiet as mice, quick as rabbits. Alara and Lyra moved like little shadows, their soft-soled boots making no sound on the dry earth. Silas, with Willow clinging to his hand, followed a little behind, ready to provide cover. Alara, remembering Silas's training, used the tall prairie grass for cover, crawling low to the ground. She spotted a stack of loose crates near the sleeping guards, and with a nod from Silas, she nudged one, sending it clattering loudly. The two guards jolted awake, grumbling and looking towards a noise. This was Lyra's cue. She had found a small, dry branch and, with surprising force, threw it into a thicket further away. It landed with a rustle and a snap, sounding like an animal. The guards, annoyed and half asleep, decided to investigate the second noise, moving away from the captives. As they moved off, Silas, Alara, and Lyra sprang into action. Silas quickly cut the ropes binding the gables. Mr. Gable, stiff from being tied, whispered, "How did you find us?" Silas just smiled and pointed to the girls. They did. Willow, seeing Thomas, ran to him, giving him a tight hug. The family, weary but safe, moved silently with Silas and the girls towards their horses. They left no trace, fading back into the vast prairie, leaving the slavers to wake to an empty camp and a mystery. Begin. The journey back was slower, more cautious, but filled with a quiet joy. The Gables rode with Silas and the girls, their faces etched with exhaustion but glowing with relief. Mrs. Gable reached over and squeezed Alara's hand. "Thank you, child," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us. All of you." Mr. Gable nodded, his eyes welling up. Even young Thomas, still a little bewildered, clutched Willow's hand tightly, a silent promise of friendship. As the sun rose fully, painting the prairie in warm hues of gold and amber, they arrived back at the safety of their homes. The news of the rescue spread quickly, and soon neighbors gathered, their faces a mixture of relief and amazement. They had heard about Silas's lessons, but few had truly understood their importance until now. The girls, usually shy and retiring, stood a little taller, their shoulders straighter. They hadn't just learned to read and navigate. They had put that knowledge to work, saving lives. Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling stronger and deeper than any fear she had felt. She looked at her ink-stained fingers, not with annoyance, but with pride. Each smudge was a mark of courage, a testament to what she had learned. Lyra, usually focused on the stars, found herself looking at the faces of her neighbors, seeing their gratitude, and feeling a powerful connection to her community. Her ability to read the night sky had not just guided them, it had brought someone home. Even little Willow, who had clung to Thomas, understood that they had done something very good. She had been brave, and her bravery had helped her friend. They had faced danger, used their wits, and succeeded. It was a victory not of strength, but of smarts and quiet determination. They weren't just pupils anymore. They were heroes, proving that even the youngest and seemingly weakest among them could do great things when armed with knowledge and a brave heart. The gratitude of their neighbors was a powerful reward, but the quiet pride in their own hearts was even greater. Begin. Days later, the old barn settled back into its usual peaceful hum. The scent of hay filled the air, and the gentle sounds of horses shifting in their stalls provided a comforting backdrop. Silas sat on his overturned barrel, the lantern glowing softly, as Alara, Lyra, and Willow gathered around him once more. Their fingers, though still a little smudged with ink from their lessons, now moved with a new confidence. The rescue had changed them. They still pored over books, their reading skills growing sharper with each passing day. But now they understood the real power of the words. They copied down new constellations, their star charts becoming even more detailed. Each time needed a reminder of the night, they used the sky to guide them through danger. The rhythm of hoofbeats was no longer just an exercise. It was the beat of courage, the measure of a journey bravely taken. Silas watched them, a deep sense of satisfaction warming his old heart. He had once believed that a soldier's greatest strength lay in his weapon. But these girls, with their ink-stained fingers and their bright, curious minds, had shown him something even more profound. They had faced true wickedness with nothing but knowledge, quick thinking, and brave hearts. Their kindness for their neighbors had driven them, and their learning had been their truest weapon. You see, Silas said, his voice soft but clear, the things we learn here, they are not just for knowing. They are for doing. They are for helping. A book can show you the world, and the stars can show you the way, but it's your own good heart that tells you when to go. Alara carefully drew a new star, Lyra checked its position, and Willow, giggling, drew a smiling face on the corner of the paper. The barn was no longer just a place for lessons. It was a testament to bravery, a reminder that in the face of darkness, the light of knowledge and the warmth of human kindness could always guide the way home. And on the wild plains, those were the greatest strengths of all. End.